The storm came without warning, as storms often did on Arinder's southern ice fields. One moment the horizon was a pale blue smear beneath the twin suns, and the next it vanished behind a wall of shrieking white. Snow whipped sideways like thrown sand, stinging exposed skin and clogging filters. Cale Arvin cursed under his breath and pulled his hood tighter, the heated threads in his survival cloak humming weakly as they fought the cold. He had no business being this far out. Cale was a salvage runner, not an explorer. His work kept him skimming the edges of civilization, derelict stations, crashed freighters, forgotten research outposts half buried in ice. He took risks, sure, but calculated ones. The kind where you knew the odds and chose them anyway. This trekking across open ice during storm season was just stupid. But the beacon had been clear. A distress signal, old style, repeating on a narrow band almost no one used anymore. Cale had picked it up by accident while calibrating his long-range scanner. He could have ignored it. Plenty of salvage runners did. Out here, most distress calls were traps or ghosts, automated loops playing long after their owners were dead. Still, something about this one bothered him. The signal wasn't degrading. It wasn't drifting. It was steady. Now, as the storm howled louder, Cale wondered if his conscience had finally caught up with him to get him killed. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. His boots crunched through deepening snow, and his NAV display flickered as ice interfered with the signal. Cale slowed, scanning the white void ahead. That was when he saw it, a dark shape half buried near a jagged ridge of ice. At first, he thought it was wreckage. Then it moved. Cale broke into a run, lungs burning in the thin, freezing air. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a person. A woman collapsed on her side, her cloak torn and stiff with ice. Frost clung to her lashes and hair, which was a striking shade of silver white, almost glowing against the snow. She wasn't moving. "Hey!" Cale shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, relief flooding him when he felt a faint pulse. Weak but there. Her clothing was unlike anything he'd seen out here. Not scavenger gear or standard issue exploration wear. The fabric was layered, elegant even beneath the damage, woven with faintly luminescent threads that pulsed softly, as if reacting to his touch. "Who the hell are you?" he muttered. No answer, of course. Cale didn't waste time. He activated his emergency shelter, a compact dome that unfolded from his pack and anchored itself into the ice. Inside, the temperature rose just enough to keep death at bay. He stripped off his gloves and carefully adjusted the woman's cloak, checking for injuries. There was a deep gash along her left arm, crudely sealed with a field patch that had long since failed. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue. She shouldn't have been alive. Cale injected a thermal stimulant and wrapped her arm in a fresh seal. "Stay with me," he said, though he wasn't sure why. People rarely did. Minutes passed. The storm raged outside, battering the shelter, but inside the woman stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a vivid, icy blue that snapped into focus far faster than he expected. She gasped and tried to sit up. "Easy," Cale said, raising his hands. "You're safe. Mostly." Her gaze locked onto his face, sharp and assessing despite her condition. Where are we?" "Southern ice fields. You sent a distress signal." She frowned, as if confused by that. "I didn't." Her voice faltered and she winced, pressing a hand to her arm. "The storm, my escort." Cale caught the important word. "Escort." She hesitated, then looked away. "They're gone." That answer raised more questions than it settled, but Cale let it drop. "You'll freeze if we stay here. I've got a crawler about 2 clicks west. If it hasn't been buried." Her eyes widened. You came alone? Yeah. Dumb, I know. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, then something like respect. Thank you for not ignoring the signal. Kale shrugged. Didn't feel right. They waited until the storm eased. Then Kale helped her to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, lighter than she looked, and together they fought their way across the ice. By the time the crawler came into view, half buried but intact, Kale's muscles screamed, and his breath came in ragged clouds. Inside the vehicle, warmth enveloped them. The woman sagged into a seat, eyes closing. What's your name? Kale asked as he set the crawler on autopilot toward his base camp. She hesitated again. Lyra, she said softly. It sounded rehearsed. Kale didn't press. Everyone out here had secrets. Kale's base camp was little more than a reinforced shelter anchored into the ice near an old mining route. Inside, it was cluttered but functional, humming with generators and the smell of recycled air. He guided Lyra to a bunk and activated the med unit. As the scanner passed over her, the display spiked with readings Kale had never seen. Her cellular structure showed signs of advanced genetic augmentation, far beyond what most people could afford. You military? He asked, half joking. She gave a small, tired smile. No. Corporate then? No. Royal. He laughed. Kidding. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The med unit finished sealing her wound and administered a recovery cocktail. Lyra lay back, breathing more evenly. You should rest, Kale said. We'll figure out what to do when you're not half frozen. She nodded, eyes drifting shut. You're kind, Kale Arvin. He froze. I didn't tell you my name. Her eyes opened just a sliver. Your crawler's registry is public. I noticed it when we boarded. Right, he said slowly. Of course. But the explanation didn't sit right. Over the next 2 days, the storm pinned them in place. Lyra recovered faster than expected, her strength returning in unnervingly precise increments. She moved with a grace that felt out of place in Kale's rough camp, her presence subtly changing the space, like a melody in static. They talked, cautiously at first. Kale told her about salvage runs, about growing up on a station that no longer existed. Lyra listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, laughing softly at his dry humor. When he asked about her past, her answers stayed vague. I come from the north, she said once. From a place where the ice never melts. Sounds cozy, Kale replied. She smiled sadly. It's beautiful. And very dangerous. On the 3rd day, Kale's perimeter alarms chimed. He checked the display and swore. 3 heat signatures approaching fast, snowrunners, military grade. Friends of yours? He asked. Lyra's face drained of color. No. Before Kale could ask more, the first explosion rocked the camp, throwing him against a console. The lights flickered. Stay here, he said, grabbing his rifle. The attackers breached the outer hatch with frightening efficiency. They wore white combat armor marked with a sigil Kale didn't recognize, a stylized crown split by a blade. Royal insignia. Kale's heart slammed in his chest. Lyra, he whispered. Who are these people? She stood behind him, no longer weak or unsteady. Her posture had changed, her voice calm and commanding. They are usurpers. And they've finally found me. The firefight was brutal and fast. Kale fought like he always did, dirty, efficient, desperate. Lyra moved with him, not as a helpless civilian but as a trained operative, her movements precise. At one point, she disarmed an attacker with bare hands, eyes cold and focused. When it was over, 2 attackers lay dead, and the 3rd fled into the storm. Kale stared at Lyra, chest heaving. You want to explain? She met his gaze. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sank onto a crate, the weight of something unseen pressing down on her. "My full name," she said quietly, "is Lyra Valen THRSS, crown heir of the Arendorian Compact." Kale barked out a laugh. "You're serious?" "Yes." The word hung in the air. "You're telling me I dragged a queen out of the snow?" "Not yet a queen," she corrected. "But I would have been, if I hadn't fled." Kale ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane." "It wasn't supposed to involve you," Lyra said. "My escort was ambushed. I escaped with the beacon, hoping to disappear. You weren't meant to answer." "Well," Kale said dryly, "I've got a talent for bad timing." The truth spilled out over the next hour. A coup had fractured the compact. Lyra's family was dead or missing. The usurpers hunted her relentlessly, knowing that as long as she lived, their claim was fragile. "You should leave," she said at last. "They'll come back with more. I won't risk your life further." Kale looked around his camp, the shelter, the tools, the life he'd carved out on the edge of nowhere. He thought of the way she'd listened to him, the way she'd thanked him like it meant something. "I didn't save you to hand you back to killers," he said. She studied him, eyes softening. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," Kale replied, "but I'm already in this." The journey north was dangerous. Kale rerouted through old mining tunnels and frozen valleys, avoiding patrols and sensors. Along the way, Lyra shed her last pretenses. She spoke of the compact, of responsibility drilled into her from childhood, of the loneliness of being groomed to rule. "I envied people like you," she admitted one night as they camped beneath shimmering auroras. "Those who chose their own paths." Kale snorted. "Most days, it doesn't feel like much of a choice." "Still," she said, "you chose to help me." When they finally reached the hidden enclave loyal to Lyra's claim, the reception was cautious, then reverent. Advisors bowed. Soldiers saluted. The reality of who she was settled heavily on Kale's shoulders. Lyra turned to him at the gates, her expression torn. "This is where we part ways." "Figures," Kale said, forcing a smile. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You could stay. I could ask it of you." Kale met her gaze, seeing the weight of a crown already forming. "And become what? A symbol? A liability?" "Someone I trust," she said simply. The offer stunned him more than any revelation so far. In the end, Kale shook his head. "You need people who know this world. I belong out there." Lyra nodded, tears shining in her eyes. She reached out, pressing a small insignia into his hand, a royal crest, warm to the touch. "Then take this," she said, "so the world remembers what you did." Months later, when the compact was restored and Queen Lyra Valen THRSS was crowned, stories spread of the stranger who had saved her life in the frozen wastes. Kale Arvin heard them from the edge of the ice, listening to a broadcast crackle through his console. He smiled, powered down the signal, and set his crawler toward the horizon. Somewhere far behind him, a queen ruled because he had answered a call. And that was enough. The enclave rose from the ice like a secret the world had tried to bury. Jagged spires of black alloy and crystal jutted upward from a frozen ravine, their surfaces etched with ancient Arendorian glyphs that glowed faintly beneath layers of frost. Shield emitters hummed low and steady, distorting the air as Kale guided the crawler through the final checkpoint. Armed sentries stepped forward, weapons trained, then hesitated as Lyra removed her hood. The reaction was immediate. One by one, soldiers dropped to one knee. "Crown Heir confirmed," a voice said over the comms, unsteady with disbelief. "Open the inner gate." Massive doors groaned apart, releasing a rush of warm air and light. Kale felt suddenly out of place, his patched gear, scarred rifle, and weather-beaten crawler standing in stark contrast to the polished steel and ceremonial banners lining the passageway. Lyra stood straighter now, her exhaustion buried beneath something deeper. Purpose. The moment she crossed the threshold, the weight she carried shifted, not lighter, but clearer. They escorted her into the central chamber, where advisors, generals, and archivists gathered in stunned silence. Faces hardened by years of resistance softened as they looked upon her, alive and breathing. She survived, someone whispered. Lyra stepped forward. I did. And I did not survive alone. All eyes turned to Kale. He shifted awkwardly. Hi. The tension cracked, replaced by murmurs and astonished laughter. But beneath it all was reverence, not for him, but for what he represented. Proof that fate had not abandoned them. The debrief that followed lasted hours. Maps flickered to life. Names of traitorous houses were spoken aloud for the first time without fear. The usurpers' movements, the fractures in their coalition, the cities waiting only for a symbol to rise again. That symbol now stood among them. Yet through it all, Lyra kept glancing back at Kale, as if grounding herself in the memory of the frozen wastes, of a time when she was just a woman trying to survive, not a crown waiting to fall into place. When the chamber finally emptied, dusk light filtering through crystal windows, Lyra approached him alone. You can leave whenever you wish, she said. You've done more than anyone could ask. Kale leaned against a pillar. Funny thing about saving someone. Once you do it, walking away feels strange. A faint smile touched her lips. You were never meant to be part of this world. Neither were you, he replied gently. You were meant to choose. Silence stretched between them, thick with things neither quite dared to say. In the days that followed, events moved quickly. Lyra appeared before the Compact's surviving councils via secure transmission, her image broadcast across cities and stations long starved of hope. The effect was electric. Loyal fleets defected overnight. Border systems rose in coordinated revolt. The usurpers responded with violence and failed. Kale stayed on the fringes, assisting where he could. He trained militia units in use-to-real combat, repaired ancient defense systems buried beneath the ice, and ran supply routes through territory no royal ship could safely traverse. Yet everywhere he went, people knew him. The man from the frozen wastes. The one who answered the call. When the final confrontation came, it was swift and decisive. Loyalist forces breached the capital spire, while Kale's diversionary team drew fire from the outer ring. The usurpers' banners burned, their leaders captured or scattered into exile. By dawn, the war was over. The coronation took place beneath the open sky, where the ice fields met the stars. Thousands gathered in person, millions more watched from across the system. Ancient machines, dormant for generations, awakened as Lyra stepped onto the platform, their lights bending toward her as if recognizing something written into the fabric of the world. She wore no crown at first. Instead, she spoke. I was raised to believe royalty meant distance, Lyra said, her voice carrying across the frozen plain. That power required separation. I learned in the coldest place imaginable how wrong that was. Her eyes found Kale in the crowd. I stand here because someone chose compassion over caution. Because one life mattered enough to risk another. That is the future I claim. An elder stepped forward, placing the crown of HeRescuedARoyal upon her head. The artifact flared with pale blue light, resonating with the ancient systems beneath the ice. Queen Lyra Valen HeRescuedARoyal rose. The crowd erupted. Later, as celebrations filled the enclave, Lyra found Kale preparing his crawler. So, she said softly, This is goodbye. Yeah, he replied, not turning around. I don't do well with palaces. She stepped closer. I could order you to stay. He finally faced her, smiling. You could, and I'd hate you for it. She laughed quietly, then pressed something into his hand, a small device, warm and humming with energy. An open channel, she said. Encrypted. No matter where you go. Kale closed his fingers around it. Careful, Your Majesty. People might talk. Let them, she said. Stories matter. He nodded once, climbed into the crawler, and powered it up. As the engines rumbled to life, Lyra raised her hand, not in command, but in farewell. Kale drove out into the white horizon, the ice field stretching endlessly ahead. Weeks later, far from any throne or banner, a salvage runner intercepted a familiar signal drifting across an old frequency band. Kale smiled as he adjusted the receiver. The world moved on. Empires rose and fell. Queens ruled. But somewhere in the frozen wastes, a man continued answering calls, never knowing which one might change the fate of the galaxy again. And somewhere else, a queen never forgot the stranger who saved her before she wore a crown.